What's good, people? It's your boy Sanity Insanity. You know what I mean? For those of you who don't know me, I'm a contemporary visual artist, creative director at Insanity. I'm gonna stop having to introduce myself because after a while, you guys gonna have to, you know what I mean, get to know the boy. But yeah, if you're just checking this out, it's called In Relation to Art. Is a show that I've created to kind of talk about art. Somewhat critique, somewhat give my opinion, somewhat educate, and like kind of find a link between the everyday people and like art and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what we're doing here. And yeah, today we're going to be highlighting or discussing protests in relation to art. Yeah, let's go to it. So this one I was a bit excited to talk about it because a lot of the artists I like are, I guess they're activists of some sort, and in a lot of ways, there's conversations as I mean, which is interesting. I'm looking at a print of getting this by Ai Weiwei, and it's called. He basically writes in it, "Can you be an artist without being an activist?" I know I'm going straight into it, but the idea anyway around this talk of today is we're going to be discussing how protesting is affected by art, or how art is used to protest, or how protest is used against art, because that's kind of 2022 special, I guess. So yeah, we're going to talk about other artists that also consider themselves activists and use arts to kind of execute their message and move things forward. So that's what the show is about today, you feel me? Gum fingers, obviously, you feel me? But yeah, so let's go into it. I think the brief introduction is before I even actually go into the all the different artists and the protests and whatnot, I would start off by talking about the power of art. I think if you understand the power of art, then you get to understand some of the things I'm kind of explaining. But what I'll do is I'll highlight it, not talk about it, because that's a whole different conversation in itself. But I said in the last show, similar here, it's something I want you guys kind of like take with you because it's really a way that you can kind of appreciate art. Anyway, the power of art, like I always say, is the ability to go into your brain or your mind without your consent, without your ability to kind of stop it, without being able to block it out. A bit like music, a bit like art, a bit like photography, imagery, and all of that. The reality is you can be moving about your day and you see this image and it flashes once and now you can't get rid of it. Essentially, for me, that's the power of art, because then through that little instance, if I repeat that thing consistently, I'll be able to kind of implant my viewpoints, my image, what I think you should think. I'll be able to put that in your brain, and in a way it can affect how you kind of proceed. Now, when you apply this to protests, in a way, you can argue that good artwork that goes hand in hand with protests sometimes are just as effective. And I'll explain this from multiple spaces. So we'll start off with like things like fashion, for example. Fashion using art and protests, you find that over the years, from as long back as I don't know, I think in the 70s, a lot of those hippie times, people identify who they are and what they are through the fashion of what they carry and what they wear. And so through this, you can imagine over the years, one of the first things that was usually done when I guess they had a goal or a cause that they were fighting against, things like shirts, flags, all those kind of or boards with different designs of what it is that they were fighting for were going to be made, which is a direct show of like immediately you're going to do a protest. There's an art implication almost directly immediately after you think of it. But beyond just the direct art impact, sometimes what you have on the so-called imagery has a direct impact on how people may support the cause, or maybe potentially just not even care about the cause, so to speak. And I feel art in itself, with better study of how different protests happen, successful ones, not successful ones, you kind of see that it always had a role to play through it all. Another example of like that is when you look at the I'm being very particular because also I don't want to bring generic ones. There's a lot of things that you can research. So I'll tell you this much. You can type in art and protest, and it gives you a lot of artists who consider themselves activists and works that they show. I'll give you a few examples of protests that are also not directly involving like going in front of like somewhere with a sign or a logo. But all of these are art protests, so to speak. So for example, you can argue that even protesting in itself, the action of it, of like going there and standing or whatever, is very closely linked to how a performance art piece is kind of meant to execute something. depends on who you're talking to. They might even describe protest as a performance art. Not saying now that every protest is for the purpose of art, but that's when you already look at art as a commercial thing and not as a part of life. Because when you think of art as a part of life, then as such, almost everything you do can be considered art, especially things like protest. But there are some artists or some people that protest that specifically take their time to put a lot of thought into how they do it, which becomes art, but also like a protest. An example of that is Banksy. Banksy, I know we talked about Banksy a bit last show. We're talking about Banksy again, but for example, Banksy, I think it was slightly before the COVID, there was those talks about immigrants, and there were immigrants left in the sea to drown and whatnot. Banksy bought a ship, I believe, in auction, painted it, of course, still made it his art piece, and it's still art piece, and went ahead to go and save some of those people in the sea. And yeah, picked them up, rescued some of them. Now, in a lot of ways, you can argue that that direct action is also art in a lot of ways, because it has a performance element to it, but it also has a message. It's also executed. There's some art involved in it, and also it has impact ultimately. And so these are some of the kind of ways that artists can protest without directly, should I say, putting a sign up or writing up or something. Sometimes the protest is even silent. Anyway, I say that all of that to say that when you think of the power of art and when you think of the implication of it being applied when people go and protest, you will see why over the years when people protest, art was always an element and how effective it can be. Now, it gets interesting when you hit around 2001, 2021 or 2022. I can't remember what year the extraness started, but a while ago, no, actually 2022, 2023, I believe. Yes, actually, a while ago, you had these guys. What do you call them? Gas open now. So sorry, guys, I really don't know your name. I'm also not trying to be disrespectful. I actually mess with your goal. I actually mess with those guys. I think that there's reasons to kind of consider our climate, and there's reasons to look around. In fact, I was just complimenting Thomas Saraceno about his art being about that. And I think that's special. My question now is, when you have these people going in to pour paint on like quote unquote old masters or work like that, I get very confused as to what is meant to do, because I think it's actually stupid in the sense, like, you have people that are using art to protest, then you have people that are protesting against the art. Now, if the aim is to create attention, there is attention that you can create, and which I do feel like they do create enough attention, which is good, I guess, to a level, to their cause. But then there's the complication of that's not the most effective attention you have, because you just annoy people and people don't really want to support your goal, even by the people that support your goal. And then you become a nuisance. But that conversation is a conversation for another day. But they're a perfect example of people protesting the art. And in 2022, 2023, or should I say now 2024, baby, is interesting to kind of see how you can play around with the idea of having a stand, but also, I mean, that's not play around, but it's people that have a stand, but also to achieve what they want, they've looked for the most inconvenience that they can inconvenience people. And as a society, we kind of accept that it's okay, because for me, that comes across as bullying, if you ask me. However, is it effective? It may be. So regardless of what I'm saying, maybe the conversation is they're actually doing the right thing because it's effective. Maybe they have been able to bring a lot of attention to their courses. Maybe they've been able to kind of push things up and down. Maybe it's also something that we can actually discuss on a bigger scale, and actually talk about what's the value of art in regards to the stop oil now are talking about survival and the planets and the life of the planet versus art. And you can argue that art is superficial and it's not as deep as like the planet's world. But then also there is a timeline thing affected. Like, it's not like the world is stopping today, and by destroying this art that has already been made, it's not going to stop the climate. Anyway, put it this way, with their angle, I just all the way don't understand it. Actually, this is what I'll do, right? Just to be fair to them, I'll read, I screenshotted something which it kind of like described, I guess, one of their founders, what she believed about it or something about. Wait, give me a second. Actually, I'll find it. And in all fairness to them, because these guys have been everywhere, you've got like painters with like the Mona Lisa, they've gone there, they've gone to, like, they've been everywhere. And even actually more important than the just oil people, it's become a thing where when you don't like something, you can go and protest. But what I wonder is, I don't know if these people are protesting in front of banks per se, maybe in front of like, or are they protesting in like, factories that maybe are involved with this, BP's office, parliament, places that they actually have people that can affect how things work. I don't actually see them protesting in it, which brings about a very interesting conversation, because are you only protesting art because it looks like you're doing something, but you're not really doing something, and the people in the art world wouldn't really kick you out of the gallery because of this, that, and the third? Or maybe you're actually going to protest the art because you feel like those are where those other people go for their leisure. When they're done destroying the world in their offices, they go to the galleries to have fun. I'm not too sure what the angle is, but I think it was a very interesting conversation to have. I mean, hell, that's why the comments exist. You guys go stupid on it. But more importantly, from my perspective, I think it's an interesting role of protest regarding art, how protests or artists went from like, or artists and art world, or the world kind of sees art as something to use to protest. But in 2022, 2023, 2024, we have people protesting against the art to try and get to the people. It's just a really weird one. Anyway, moving on from that special group, they are artists that also kind of consider themselves activists. So I don't know what Banksy considers himself, but you have people like Ai Weiwei, who's also an artist that does, political statements in his work. He's somewhat I guess you can call a lot of his work protest. I mean, Ai Weiwei is really interesting, right? Because if you're not familiar with him, go check him. One of the shows he did last year in the Design Museum, which was cool about it, is because if you watch the show, you will notice I say if you watch the show, if you went to the show, and you wouldn't notice because it was just one of the artwork there. I need to be more particular with my words, guys. Bear with me. Anyway, if you went to the show, you would have seen that he had this, is a walk where he went around different, I guess, monumental parts of the world, or with these old, I guess it's the system he was fighting. And he just travels there. He has a fuck you hand signal, cover, like he takes a picture with his hands. I'm not really telling you guys F you guys, but it's basically like a F you. He takes a picture in front of the monument, and you can kind of like see the walk of where he's saying F you. And I guess the metaphor behind it is like F the system, you know what I'm saying? But I found it very clever. Or he has actually more impactful one. And Ai Weiwei has an artist, has actually been arrested. And I think he spent 81 days in prison in 2011. I might be wrong about the dates, but everything I'm saying, again, just type in Ai Weiwei prison. All of this you'll be able to search. Google's your friend, bro. But having said that, you have people like Ai Weiwei, like who he lives it. There's another walk which I think is very powerful, and this is also just to kind of give more information to the average person who may not understand why I'm even linking these two together or mentioning him in the context of activist who's also an artist. He has it was a building that was burnt down, and I mean, it's too complicated to kind of like pull it out from my head and give you the exact details without offending anybody. But from my understanding, he basically took the metal rods that were from the building, and ended up exhibiting it to represent all the people that were from the building, which I believe that's what ended up in prison, to represent all the people that died in prison. But you can check. It's just type in Ai Weiwei, put metal rods or like Ai Weiwei artwork, and you get more information about it. If you're interested in that. But he's a very important artist, I think, interesting artist as well, because his work and his purpose and what he feels he should do with his work is also interesting, because for him is bigger than being able to create work or make money from it. It's also about making a statement and having a stand and using the art to kind of get away with or push agendas. Which is also very interesting because, again, going back to the power of art, should artists use their power, i.e. influence, ability, skill-wise, and because they're good at they're good at painting and all of this stuff? How much of that responsibility do we really put on artists now, not from a political standpoint, but to actually protest with? So, for example, as an artist, if I had a goal that I didn't agree with, should I create artwork about it, or can I just protest like every normal other human being at all? And these are other conversations that I think about a lot of times. I think You know what I'll start doing as time goes on, when I start having more guests in here, I think there'll be a lot of back and forths, and I'll be able to kind of confess my inner thoughts, because I can't give you an inner thought and also explain it myself. But the idea around it is, I find it very interesting, especially when you start thinking of a position of, oh, you as a person, you're meant to do this much because you're an artist, but it also doesn't apply to everybody else. And also, it's the question of like that artist that decides to now say, okay, cool, this is what I'm doing, this. It brings about the question as, why should we listen to you when you're not a professional in that field? Or you are is a person with an opinion and a viewpoint, happens to be an artist. And these are all like really funny, because you see it happen a lot with musicians, especially, you know, every time they say something that someone doesn't really like, they remind them that they're just musicians and not politicians, or they're not professionals educated in this field. And I feel it happens a lot with art, especially with artists, where like your opinion is also, and also again, using the power. If you take into account, if I know I had this much power and I can, you know, sort of put things in the air and make you believe certain things I want, of course, to a level I can do that. But there is a question of like, you know, how much morality is kind of attached to that. Like, how much should I put my personal agendas? Like, that's what I meant by, as an artist, would it be all right to go ahead and protest something when you know you have that much power, and the protest is not necessarily a good or bad, is more like what you want versus what you don't want. So if you were to fully, i.e., if I was a big artist, I had access to everybody's mind and soul, and I thought, you know what, I want everybody to support Arsenal, and I decided to spend my time mashing up Tottenham. I mean, to be honest, I don't need to work hard for that. But like, you know, if everybody else was to start, you know, shitting on a team or something, and I kind of like led that. For me, that would also be me bullying people, also using my power to my advantage to kind of force a viewpoint or whatever. So there is also that conversation to have regarding artists and their power, and how they use it, and how they use it to execute certain goals of what they want, including within protest as well. So I think the conversation about art and protest is very, very interesting. It's very wide. I mean, I've tried to capture as much as little factors that kind of came up in this. The body of this conversation today is actually really about the Orinal people, but beyond them, they're not the first, because there is a real thing. They do have a point. They are you. It's kind of the conversation you have with like musicians that we find out that they were doing some funny stuff later, you know, or back in, like, you know, for example, R. Kelly should have been cancelled from before. I don't know what people were doing, but having said that, you know, those that happen to be like, oh no, we have to separate his music from his person. I mean, it's a very tricky one, because I am biased a bit. They might be, I guess, rappers from a certain space that I might think, look, yeah, I understand they came from negativity or whatever, and they're making music, and we just focus on their art. So even me, my hypocrisy shows. But it's also interesting, because when you don't put it on the musicians or the artists, and you now put it on the establishments that these artists or musicians kind of work with or are in, yeah, it's a very tricky one, because we're always going to say go against the money, go against the super people, go against the people behind. But if you're going against them just because you know you have more power and you can use it to bully them, I don't know, what does that really mean? Are we, you know, what are we doing as a society, if that makes sense? So if I was to be like, oh, I'm going to go protest the Tates because I know Tate has certain patrons that happen to be a certain group of people that boom, 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 boom. By the way, when I say boom, 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 I'm just like, it's whatever, etc. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, whatever those extra bits is, for whatever my reason would be to go and protest, like, quote unquote, I'm just using that as an example, by the way, say a Tate, because I'm maybe upset at a certain patron that sponsors the gallery or the museum. It does make sense, but it also doesn't make sense, because that would be like saying, oh, I can come and have an issue with you because the person that is sponsoring you, I also have an issue with, if that makes any sense. So it's just a bit ridiculous sometimes, I think. Yeah, and I don't really subscribe to the idea of cancel or no cancel culture. Really, it doesn't really mean anything in my world. However, I do get to the idea that, look, at the end of the day, even when so-called protests get kicking, the protest is always misdirected sometimes at the workers of an establishment. So when you go into Starbucks and you're protesting, you think you're protesting Starbucks, but you happen to be protesting the person in the till that is just like you, that's just here doing the job. And I don't know if we've got into a place place in society where we can all take a stand in terms of, oh, I'm not working with Microsoft, I'm not working with Apple, I'm not working with these people for some reason because we don't like something that they've done. I mean, you know, what I mean, we've barely got into the stage where we can say, I'm not going to buy, or we're not going to use our money to buy from them. So really, I mean, housing crisis, all of this. I'm not trying to make excuses for people. I'm just kind of trying to establish the reality that it is a lot more complicated than penalizing another person that's just like you for walking in a place, or in a way penalizing the establishment of that person. And by the way, I'm not trying to kind of compare galleries to like an individual person, but the perspective, if it's a gallery and it is a charity and they're funded by another person, their relationship with that person usually strictly goes regarding what they can do with the money and getting the money. It wouldn't have anything to do with this person's business, nor does it mean that this establishment is supporting this person's business, nor the other way around. So I get it. I get sometimes you can attack the money or attack the person that's behind, but quite honestly, it's also very, I don't know, it's funny to just kind of use one person's trauma or one person's issue to kind of fight the other person, if that makes any sense. Like, oh, because this is all the problems that are happening to me and I'm traumatized by this, I'm now going to take all these issues and go and pour it on another person who may not necessarily be going, or may not necessarily see these things the same way I see it. And that's beyond the oil people now, because, you know, we've had, I'm going to skip names because I don't want to get in trouble with nobody. Actually, I'm a bad man. I'm not scared. However, I'm going to skip names. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of galleries and museums that have maybe had to remove a patron, maybe had to reject somebody. Some even changed their name based on, like, you know, their close association with a company or family or group of people that, you know, have, I mean, hell, even, for example, Welcome Collection. It's quite interesting because with Welcome Collection, the people that actually protest the collection itself. So actually, let's do it this way to give you guys brief context. From my understanding, with the Welcome Collection, Henry Welcome is the owner of the place, and obviously my man is like a man of his era, like, if that makes sense. So he has look for it and you probably would find it, but he probably had a lot of negative, horrible, finesse colonial ways to get some of the things he got his hand on. However, he was a rich person that was in the UK, hyper focused, spent his money in doing a lot of medical research and things along the line, studying the human study. I mean, in fact, they were one of the lead sponsors of the Science Museum. So they're quite big in regards to like what they've spent their time to do. As a museum now is much different and has gone a little bit away from Henry Welcome himself. But when he kind of created the museum, he had all kind of different things for testing and medical stuff. In 2020, I guess 2022, I believe there is a room that was dedicated. It's called Medicine Man, and it was kind of dedicated to him. But over the years, it had a lot of kind of political conversations, argument. How did he get human beings' teeth? How do you have humans' eyes? And, you know, because they're quite some real stuff in there. He's proposed for doing it for science, I guess, and whatever you want to call that era. But when it came down to it, there was a lot of protests being raised against the kind of space based on these kind of issues, and like people really having an issue with that, rightfully so, by the way. But because of they had an issue with that, they Welcome Museum, I believe, or Welcome Collection decided to kind of have these little planks with little bit of information acknowledging the idea that these projects or these kind of like artworks or human body parts, I won't even call them artworks, are clouded in certain kind of conversation regarding how they were acquired, so to speak. That was okay for a while. It sufficed for a bit, but here's where the problem came from. Even though that was meant to be like, you know, the medical place where you can go and learn and whatever, you can't deny the fact that where it came from or how he acquired those things were that bad that when these people put those plaques or whatever, it felt like it wasn't enough, because it wasn't enough in a way. They weren't quite direct. They weren't saying enough, like directly, like this was stolen from these people, or this did this, or this was finessed from these people. It was still somewhat general conversation, which I believe didn't stop the protests, which kind of kept on the pressure on the people. And eventually they had to close that part of the collection specifically, which is a shame too, Because when you think of it, for the purpose that he wanted it, that's how we were going to study the human body and all of that. But, that's a whole conversation in a different way, because people argue that Da Vinci and people like Michelangelo actually opened human bodies to find out where the bones and structures are to create their art. I mean, that's a whole different conversation, whether it's right, whether it's not right. My only point I was trying to establish here is sometimes even the pressure of a protest can actually force an art establishment to completely close up, even when they mean well, even when their practices is trying to kind of align and bring it back to this day and age and time. So it's a bigger conversation. I think when you think about conversation about protests and art, every protest that's ever happened, I think art is involved, which is very interesting. I think every protest that's happened, art is involved. Some protest that is even happening is done through art. And now, more importantly, the people protesting the art, I think I have a lot of question marks around that, which is why I said that probably when I have more guests, or hopefully I'll run into people, or you guys will pour out in your comments like your viewpoint on using art to protest, because you can argue it's somewhat effective. If this is something you care about the most, if I go against this, maybe you care about what I care about. Is it bullying? Is it just a weird way of handling issues? Anyway, I think it's a big rounded conversation that can be had for days and days and days. So I've just tried to highlight different parts of it, things I have viewpoints on and whatnot. I only mentioned Banksy and Ai Weiwei, but there's actually a whole list of artists that primarily kind of protest, and you can argue that that's what I said with the question like Ai Weiwei asking, can you be an artist without an activist, is a very important question. I actually, what's interesting, I remember the first time I was described as an activist, and by the way, I wouldn't even be able to wear that title, but it's just when you're coming in from a perspective of art and you're actually taking points or carrying different viewpoints and certain things, in a way, I think it's very... Poets a lot are very closely attached to activism and viewpoints and fighting and all of that, which maybe is a whole nother conversation, because maybe they just want to be artists themselves. Not every time deep stuff, and not every time, political agenda and fighting. But hey, the conversation is big. It's open for everyone to join in. Long and short of the story, I thought I'll talk about in relation to art. This was mini ranting, mini conversation, mini to here and there information. But yeah, I find it interesting how we went from using art to protest to now protesting against the art, and big up all the artists that protest or use their arts to protest. But also, how conscious should these artists be, especially when the agenda is not shared by everybody and it's kind of more personal. But yeah, long and short of story, that would be it for me. I guess this episode was a quick one. We tried to keep this longer because the last two episodes is part 1 and part 2, but really should be 1, and we've had to kind of chop it into 2 so that you guys can enjoy that. But hey, this one is a lot shorter. Hopefully you catch the vibe, and hopefully we can kind of keep it at this pace. If you guys don't comment, I'll assume I was right. So yeah, if you want to complain about something, let's go down there and do that. Also, I know I said I'll reference. I didn't reference because you man do your work in it. Go Google stuff, and if I say something wrong, then yeah, come and challenge it. But more time you can Google everything I said and find the answer. But yeah. What else would I say? Looking forward to exhibitions that are coming up. So last one I didn't really talk about any review or anything I'm looking forward to. Even this one I'm not going to go too crazy, but I know Baba Kruger's exhibition is starting soon, so I'm gassed about that one. I can't wait to see it, and yeah, that's the only thing I will mention right now for now, really. I know there's another exhibition that's cool too, but yeah, now let's leave it with that. Shout out to everybody that gets to go and enjoy all the art fairs everywhere. Maybe next time, actually, the next video I'm posting, I'll be talking about some art fairs that I'm probably going to pop into. But yeah, apart from that, actually, you know what? I might go Marrakesh, I might go Marrakesh for 154. But yeah, it depends. Yeah. Big up yourselves, everybody. You see me. Yeah, let me show you my kicks so that we can call this a day. Feel me? And yeah, we got them bad boys there. You feel me? Nothing special today. We just got one of them Inex dunks. Feel me? Bullets.